For me, the greatest paradox over Jesus' suffering is the ordinariness of it, the utter unremarkableness of it. Was it brutal? Yes. Yes, it was. Is this a great mystery that God should suffer and die? Yes. So great a mystery that even still the angels are in awe of it. But suffering happens every day. If you ever have the chance to make the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem on a busy Friday afternoon, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. You can have a whole cohort of spiritual reenactors making the way of the cross. And around them all is the busyness of a business day. There are shopkeepers hawking their wares. There are errand boys running back and forth, customers haggling over the price of this or that. These people see this activity all the time. It's nothing special. And as long as you don't get in the way of their business, nobody cares. It wouldn't have been that different those 2,000 years ago. Were there people who were upset about what was going on with Jesus? Yes, there were. The scriptures recall to us that there were women wailing and lamenting him. But for the most part, this was just a part of the new normal of Roman rule. Jesus wasn't the first Jew to be sacrificed to placate the Romans, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. Were the people of Jerusalem happy about this arrangement? No. But they dealt with it. And in fact, what we see in the scriptures is that the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, they all collude to maintain the status quo. With the exception of a few revolutionaries, this is what people accepted as life. It's what they took for granted. And I can imagine that there were countless people who encountered Jesus carrying his cross, bruised and bloodied, who maybe thought to themselves, boy, I'm glad that's not me carrying a cross. And then a split second later went back to haggling over the price of pears. We need to remember this. Whenever we fall into that trap of thinking that we are somehow more enlightened or more evolved, or that our society has now become orders of magnitude more just, because we do the same thing all the time. There are all kinds of suffering that we ignore, that we choose to avoid, or when it's our own, that we numb ourselves to. It's a natural reaction, I suppose. We are aware of our own powerlessness to end suffering ultimately, or in a particular situation for ourselves or for someone else. And our powerlessness makes us fearful, and that fear induces us to cowardice very often. In fact, when we aren't induced to that fear, it really reveals the glory of the spiritual gift of courage. When we are able to face suffering head on and deal with it head on. But it is the exception, not the rule. At the very fiber of our being, there is a resistance to suffering. And it will always be that way. We will always have a disdain for suffering. We will always seek to somehow find a shortcut around it. or we will seek to push it out of our minds. But on this Good Friday, we see something very important. We see that there is something God has done in his ingenious plan to save us. You see, even deeper than that aspect of ourselves, which will always try to avoid suffering, there's that part of us, that core of our hearts, our ever restless hearts, that were made by God and for God, and long so deeply to rest eternally in him. That part of our hearts, it always is driving us outward from ourselves, carrying us beyond ourselves, beyond our fears. It is always enticed by what is good, by what is true, by what is beautiful, seeking the Lord. It's always there. And it's deeper, more fundamental, more visceral, even than our avoidance of suffering. Why do we have to suffer? No one knows. It's one of the great eternal questions. But the suffering of Jesus that we commemorate on this Good Friday, that reveals something to us. It's as if God is saying to us about suffering, listen, don't ignore it. Do not numb yourself to it. Face it. Enter into it. And when you do, when you experience real suffering, when you yourself are crying out from the depths of your soul, my God, why have you abandoned me? It is precisely there that you will encounter me, where I have been waiting for you all along to find me.